This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development from a group of people with one thing in common. We love Drupal. This is episode 462, DrupalCon Singapore. On today's show, we're talking about DrupalCon Singapore, what you can expect, and what's next for DrupalCon in Asia, with our guests, Mike Richardson and Surabhi Gokte. We'll also cover Filefield Paths as our module of the week. Welcome to Talking Drupal. Our guests today are Mike Richardson and Surabhi Gokte. Mike helps promote Drupal by organizing community events, including the upcoming DrupalCon Singapore, which we're going to talk about today. He's the current chair of the Drupal Asia Steering Committee and the treasurer of Drupal South. In his spare time, Mike is the managing director of IronStar, an enterprise Drupal hosting provider in Australia that specializes in hosting high traffic, high security sites. Mike, welcome to the show.
Thank you. And I don't want to ruin the illusion, but I love the transition to John's radio voice. We've been talking for 20 minutes and then this voice comes out. I love it.
Don't worry. I'll go back to the non-radio voice as soon as the intros are done.
John, you laughed when you were reading this, and I laughed too because it said in his spare time. And then Mike, I assume your actual job is the managing director, but you spend more time doing other things.
Yeah, it's the only job that pays, and it's the one that comes last too often, I think. But yes,
so my laughter was that, but also the fact that after the first two things, like he still has spare time to do the other thing, or vice versa. But anyway, let's get to our second guest. Surabhi is a passionate non-code contributor in the Drupal community and has contributed to various events within India, Europe, and the US. Her contributions can be found on her Drupal.org profile, which we will link to in the show notes. Surabhi, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us again.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
For those of you that don't know, I am John Picozzi, a solutions architect at EPAM and back from vacation. Thank you, Martin, for filling in last week. I appreciate that. And today, my co-hosts are Josh Miller, Director of Web Development at Urban Institute.
In his spare time.
I direct in my spare time.
And Nick Laughlin, founder at Enlightened Development.
Good evening. Good evening. It's always fun to record at a different time than our usual, so we can get some people on the other side of the world from us.
I was going to call this Talking Drupal at night, but I realized it's only nighttime for maybe 3 or 4 of us, so it doesn't really apply. But as per the usual, let's move on to our module of the week and turn it over to Martin Anderson-Klutz, a senior solutions engineer at Acquia and a maintainer of a number of Drupal modules and recipes of his own. Martin, what do you have for us this week?
Thanks, John. Have you ever wanted to use a variety of tokens to customize the directory and file names of your uploaded files? There's a module for that. It's called Filefield Paths, and it was created in July of 2008 by Stuart Clark, who goes by Deciphered, though recent releases are by Ole Behera, who goes by Voliger of Golem's GABB. In terms of versions available, it has a 7.x-1.2 and an 8.x-1.0 beta 7, the latter of which supports Drupal 9.3 or newer, and Drupal 10. It is officially listed as seeking co-maintainers, and in terms of security coverage, it's opted in, but of course there's no coverage in practice for Drupal 9 or 10 because it doesn't have a stable release. It does have test coverage, and in terms of open issues, there are 131 open issues, 50 of which are bugs against the current branch, which is actually pretty good considering the module is officially in use by almost 35,000 sites, according to Drupal.org. Now, this module allows you to customize file names and paths by leveraging a variety of entity-based tokens. It also integrates with the Path Auto module, allowing you to optionally clean up the tokens, for example, by removing slashes, filtering out words or punctuation, and so on. You can also work with the transliteration module to convert Unicode characters into US ASCII 2. And Filefield Paths also has options to rename and move existing files and can retroactively rename files, effectively bulk updating and moving all of your existing files. It can also work with the redirect module to automatically create redirects from the old path to the new file name and location when doing that bulk renaming. I'd also like to give a tip of the cap to Jim Birch of Canopy for suggesting this module when I was talking to a customer who was looking to achieve pretty much exactly what this module does. So let's talk about Filefield Paths.
It's funny, Martin, now you were describing this and I was kind of like, doesn't core already do, or well, doesn't core plus tokens already do this? And then like you started talking about moving files and bulk moving files and like redirecting files and like all the other things. And I was like, oh, core doesn't do that.
Well, that I was going to actually ask something similar if that's ever happened to anybody, because I needed this functionality almost 6 months ago on a project. And I was like, oh yeah, core does that. Like, I know I've done it before, and I went to do it and it couldn't. I ended up writing something I must have used this module in the past because I knew that functionality existed, and then I just couldn't find it again. And I wrote something simple to do something similar myself.
Am I wrong though? Core does, if you have tokens installed with core, it will let you tokenize the file path for a file, right?
I mean, tokens weren't included until Drupal 8, right?
Yeah. My understanding is that with core, you can use user tokens as part of the file name, but not sort of like node-based tokens and like related entities.
Oh, yeah. Well, now I'm going to have to go test that out. Not that I don't believe you, but I'm going to have to re-educate myself.
I think it might depend on the field you're using too, on where it can place it in a folder.
Yeah.
Yeah, very true.
And I think most of that too is about like the directory that it goes in, than the actual file name.
Very true.
Yeah, and reading up on this module, it was even saying that if there are certain tokens that it won't know certain like how they resolve until the node is actually saved, it'll kind of like put it into a temporary location, and then once the node is saved, then it'll actually move it to the final place once it has all of the information saved. So, pretty sophisticated.
I feel like there may be a security hole there exploited at some point where somebody moves that file somewhere else. Nefarious.
Next Wednesday's security advisory brought to you by John Capozzi. So
everybody's like,
there is an appropriate process to announce potential security problems, and putting it on a podcast maybe isn't it.
Don't worry, this podcast's not coming out for a week. It'll be fine.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
There you go.
Good.
That's right.
Plenty of time to clean up my tracks.
I had a couple of quick points, but I first of all, I remember using this module from Drupal 7 and loved it in Drupal 7. Absolutely loved it. This is the kind of thing that really like solidified my desire to keep working with Drupal. It seemed there was always a little utility module that scratched an itch for a particular project that just really worked really well. And this one, no exception. I believe it's actually used the transliteration module since Drupal 7, which was one of the things I wanted to incorporate, because I was working with a website that had a lot of Cyrillic characters, and there was a particular file system that was struggling with it. And anyway, I ended up using this module to solve that, like I feel like a decade ago. And the fact that this thing is 16 years old, it can almost drive at this point, which I think is amazing. But before Martin goes, I wanted to shout out that Martin, you were featured, and you haven't said anything yet, on the Drop Times 2 days ago. And Martin, you brought your wisdom and your positivity to the thoughts on Drupal Starshot. The link will be in the show notes.
Oh, thanks for calling that out, Josh. Hopefully, listeners, I guess it'll be too late by the time this podcast comes out, but I'll be sharing some similar thoughts at Drupal Camp Ottawa later this week. So probably the recording will be available in short time.
Awesome. And if you haven't already, sign up for our newsletter. We'll have a link to that in the newsletter as well. So it's all Martin all the time. That's how we do it here at Talking Drupal. Martin, always a pleasure to talk about Module of the Week with you. If folks wanted to connect or suggest a module, how could they go about doing that?
We are always happy to get nominations for Module of the Week in the Talking Drupal channel of Drupal Slack, or folks can reach out to me directly as ManClue on all of the Drupal and social channels.
Awesome. Safe travels to Drupal Camp Ottawa, and good luck.
Thanks, Chad.
Thanks, Martin.
All right, let's jump in to our primary topic. We're gonna give you a chance to talk about this at the beginning of the show, and we're gonna probably bring it up again at the end of the show. Mike, when is DrupalCon Singapore?
It is Monday, December 9 to Wednesday, December 11, 2024.
Fabulous. So plenty of time from when this podcast drops for people to go out and buy their tickets and get all their travel arrangements planned out.
Yeah. And I should point out, by the time this goes live next week, we should still have some early bird tickets available. So if you act quickly, you'll save a little bit of money as well.
How much money? Just out of curiosity.
I think it's about 150 Singaporean off the top of my head.
All right.
Should know that. Like, I should have instant recall on this stuff, right? But
yeah, that feels good. That feels good to me. I mean, 150 is a good.
I think it's at least a couple of hundred US that you'd save.
There you go.
And if you celebrate Christmas or the end of December, some sort of holiday, the 9th is still early enough that you could go there, enjoy yourself, and get home and be with family too.
I mean, depending, you could take your whole family to Singapore.
I'm sure everybody would want
whatever holiday at the end of the month you want to celebrate.
I'd stay away personally. I feel like while I'm here, I'm going to go snowboarding in Japan, or I'm going to go to the beach in Thailand, or I'm just going to stay in Singapore. Heaps of options.
Yeah, that sounds like a good time.
So, Surabhi, can you tell us the last time DrupalCon was in Asia was in 2016, which is 8 years ago. What did it take to get DrupalCon to come back to Asia, and how did you get that started?
Well, it was in talks for a long time within various groups within the Asian communities, but it happened in 2023 back in Lille when I first met Mike, and he approached with the idea of DrupalCon. I think Mike would be the right person to talk in detail about it, but that's how I was approached about the DrupalCon happening in Asia, and it was very interesting topic since it was already in talks with so many groups, and there are strong communities here in Asia where Drupal is something very important, and we do need platforms like DrupalCon here. So there was no question around it that should we do it or not. We had to do it. And it is also about having feasibility and affordability given to people here in Asia, where you get the DrupalCon experience within your reach. So it was important for Asian communities to have that kind of experience with DrupalCon that US and European regions get. And there are strong communities, as I said, in India, in Singapore, in Australia, like the whole APAC region. It's very strong when it comes to contributions coming to Drupal. And places like Vietnam, Pakistan, Philippines, these are also communities which are emerging now. So it is highly important that we do give them a platform here.
Yeah, I can tack on to that just to add a little bit of extra detail. This started it didn't start as a DrupalCon. It started as wouldn't it be great to have a regionally focused event? Like there's really great camps both before COVID and after. There's really great camps in the region that are specific to individual areas. Like there's Drupal Camp Den in Japan. There was a Drupal Camp in Manila in 2019. There's of course Drupal Camp Pune, which is huge and very successful. But I had this with Drupal South and the work that I've been lucky enough to do there. We organize an event that's kind of focused on Australia and New Zealand, and it floats between the two countries over the years, and it's grown and it's been very, very successful. And I was sort of thinking in early 2023, wouldn't it be great if there was something like this that could bring, devs from Japan and devs from India and devs from Vietnam and get them all together so that they can share and that we can promote it regionally. And it kind of came about through the Drupal development survey, where like 50% of new Drupal developers are from Asia and Asia Pacific. And there isn't an event for those people to access. And it takes, for me to get to a DrupalCon is at least 25 hours of flying. So it started as this idea of, wouldn't it be great if there was a regional event? I started talking to some people in the DA about it, and they were like, wouldn't it be great if it was a DrupalCon? And it just kind of exploded from there. And everyone's been so excited about it and so motivated by it that it's all just kind of slotted into place really easily.
Yeah, so I'm kind of curious about something, because I'm sure the European DrupalCon has this issue, but we run a local camp and we struggle to move it, between different venues that are local, never mind country to country. But when you were just mentioning this, you mentioned like getting devs from India, Vietnam, Japan. I'm curious if you have to put any special thought into communication, because those are radically different languages at some of those in some of those countries. How do you make sure that everybody can come away from an event like this feeling like they contributed, feeling like they learned something? Do you put any special thought in? I imagine you do, but do you put any special thought into that? How do you handle language barriers?
It's super hard to do. And one of the things that we would love to do is like things like live captions at the event. So during the main events and during some of the sessions, you'll be able to read along in English, especially with, the speakers that we've got are coming from all over the world. So there'll be a lot of different accents and a lot of different levels of skill speaking in English. So those subtitles will help. We're trying to organize a sort of a buddy system where if this is your first DrupalCon, you can find people who are coming from a similar background or a similar region to you. And some of those people will be more experienced going to DrupalCons, and they can kind of help shepherd you around the event and show you which sessions are good, and have someone there that you can connect to if you don't know anybody else at the event. And if English isn't your primary language, which is going to be the case for a lot of attendees, then there's an opportunity for you to have people that you can talk to who do. It is really tricky. The other thing that's really helped is there are, without us even really trying, there's kind of local ambassadors that are popping up who, like, for example, most of the early bird tickets have been sold in Japan so far. And there's a couple of people in Japan who just kind of stood up and gone, hey, I'm going to get all these people together and we're going to book flights together and we're going to book accommodation together.
Oh, nice.
And they're sort of helping to disseminate that information into the local community.
It's almost like
have you go ahead, John?
It's almost like Drupal UN. Like everybody's coming like as delegations from their specific regions or countries to Singapore to DrupalCon.
I was wondering if you maybe thought of having like language specific sessions or BOFs or something where, like, if you mentioned Japan, right? So maybe having a BOF for the Japanese speaking crowd so that they can contribute to Starshot or something, or the Vietnamese community or something. It might be interesting to have, it sounds like the primary tracks are still going to be in English because that's the common language, I think, but it might be worth having some kind of other tracks or other mini events almost.
But this is again, this is what's been so fantastic about this, is that there's so much energy and excitement around the event that these things are kind of happening naturally. Like I wouldn't be surprised if there are regional or language focused BOFs and groups that form. The flip side of it also is that as much as we want to do this, I don't know that we want to sort of encourage people to stick in their little bubbles. Like the point of this being a regional event is that you come there and you meet people from other regions that are working in similar spaces to you. So it's a delicate little balancing act, but that sort of stuff's going to happen naturally, I think.
You guys keep talking about how this kind of got started and you were connected with the DA, I think you said, Mike, and Surabhi, I don't exactly remember like what the kind of the linchpin was for you where you got connected, but I'm curious if both of you could describe quickly like what your roles have been in within the organization of this DrupalCon and within the organization of this whole process.
I'll jump in first, Surabhi, and
Yeah.
then I'll let you take over from there, because I can sort of connect the dots up until the point of DrupalCon Lille, where I got to meet Surabhi, and then things just accelerated a lot. So the linchpin for me up until that point was Owen Lansbury, who's now the chair of the DA, and he's one of the founding members of Drupal South. So I've worked with Owen for quite a few years now, and he's a good friend. And I reached out to him originally for the name of SJ in Singapore, who is one of the Drupal Asia steering committee members. He's the secretary. And I hadn't met him before, and I thought, okay, well, if I'm going to do this event in Singapore, I need to know people in Singapore. And I didn't have a huge Drupal network in Asia at the time. So I reached out to Owen, and that was sort of where I just said, I just called Owen to say, hey, could you introduce me to this guy? And I explained why. And that was when the conversation started of like, well, let's keep talking about this. And then when I went to Lille, which was fantastic, the key reason was to go and talk to sponsors and talk to people who could get involved in the event and meet people. And this was like the first DrupalCon that I'd gone to, where I'm like, okay, we want to do something in Asia. It wasn't a DrupalCon Asia yet. But Surabhi was someone that kept coming up in conversation of like, well, if you want to organize an event in Asia, you have to talk to Surabhi. And so then we started talking, and Surabhi was probably one of the first really great examples of like, yeah, let's go, let's do it. What are we waiting for? And that energy. So since then, she's helped introduce me to a lot of people in that network as well, and has helped grow it. So I'll let you go from there, Surabhi.
I love the energy you're bringing, Surabhi. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you. So yeah, I think that was the point where I was also hearing a lot about something happening on the grounds of DrupalCon within Asian communities, and there was nothing happening as such. It was just in the talks. So when initially we were talking about Drupal Asia, the committee and the event altogether, so I was a little skeptical that maybe it will happen, maybe it will not happen, but I wanted to give it another chance, and I think I did, and it was a great thing to do. And when I heard about DA being serious about it as well, and all the energy coming up from Mike and SJ and everyone, that's where I was like, yes, it is going to happen. And that's when it started, like the typical event planning, the committee meetings, all of those things started.
That's probably a good, I'm jumping ahead of the program a little bit, and tell me if I should stop, but it's probably a good segue to talk about what the Drupal Asia Steering Committee is, and sort of the organizing body behind this, if you guys like.
That's fine. Yeah, let's definitely talk about that, because we do not have a question about that. So go for it.
Okay, perfect. All right. So again, this harkens back to Drupal South a little bit. Drupal South is a community elected body that is a subcommittee, a steering committee of Linux Australia, which itself is a nonprofit that organizes a lot of local events, PyCon, WordCamp, and Drupal South, and a few others. That is the steering committee is like 5 people. 2 or 3 seats will open up every 2 years, and there's a community vote. If you're an Australian or a New Zealand member of the Drupal community, you can vote on who gets to be in that steering committee and represent it. And it's at a point now, I think half a decade or more on, where most of the original founding members have sort of moved on to other projects, and it's all fresh blood. And maybe that's not the best way to put it, but it's all sort of new faces who are shepherding this thing, and it works really well. And there's writing in the Constitution or in the Charter that makes sure that everything's equal. There's good gender representation. There's a guarantee that there's people from New Zealand who are going to be there. There's a guarantee that people who are from Australia are going to be there. And it just sings, and it works really well. And I wanted to follow that basis for organizing the event in Asia. So the Drupal Asia Steering Committee is also a steering committee under the Linux Australia Council. So the event is run not for profit. At the moment, the 6 members that we've got, Joe, SJ, Asta, Surabhi, myself, and Masami Suzuki from Japan, we are all kind of like, we've kind of put ourselves in these roles. But what we want to do after the first DrupalCon in Asia is start opening up an election and following that same model, so that this is it's a community event organized by the community that's not for profit, that can focus on moving around. It's, this event's going to be in Singapore, the next event's going to be somewhere else. And we're going to keep moving that around. Nick, to your point, that is going to be a real pain in the butt, but we're going to do it. And this body exists to promote that event and to promote Drupal in the region. And it also, again, has, there's wording in the charter to make sure that there's good diversity in it. There's wording to make sure that, India, Japan, and Singapore are the biggest Drupal countries in the region. So there's wording in there to make sure that there's always at least one person on that seat from those regions, so those communities get represented at the broader level.
So I got to ask the hard question. I don't know a ton about geography, but I knew Australia was not part of Asia, right?
It is not.
Okay, cool. Cool.
Yeah.
Just wanted to make
correct.
Sure. Sometimes if you've listened to our show, sometimes I'm wildly inaccurate, but at least I still know that. So after this year, Mike, would you like open up your seat for somebody else, or are you on a 2-year term, or how does that work?
I'm on a 2-year term, but the event is Asia and Asia Pacific, so it does kind of stretch down to Australia, New Zealand, Fiji, Solomon Islands. Like we're trying to make sure that within Europe, you've got good representation all the way from Russia and Turkey into the UK and Ireland. In the US, you've got at least North America is covered in that event. Australia and New Zealand, we have Drupal South. It's a really great event. We get really good turnout with it. But it's Australia and New Zealand. Mm-hmm. There's other parts of the Asia Pacific region that we want to make sure get included in that. So the elections will be open to anybody from Asia, as far west as Turkey, or the Asia Pacific region.
Got it. That makes a lot of sense.
I want to pose a question to an Australian. I've always wondered this. Since you have to fly no matter what country you go to, does it just kind of seem natural that any country that's within so many hours, it's pretty close to you? It just feels like you're a part of that region. Is that part of it? Is just the fact that you can fly to Singapore? I imagine the flight to Singapore is a little closer than DrupalCon North America has been in the past.
Yeah. I think this is probably the same for Surabhi as well. Like India is massive. Australia is massive. We can fly for 4 or 5 hours and we're still in our own countries. So
wow.
Everywhere is far away. Asia's really easy because a lot of it can be, for me, coming from Melbourne, a lot of it is a direct flight. So Singapore is 7 to 9 hours, depending on the jet stream and the direction. That's a great flight. Like 7 or 9 hours is nice and easy. Because for me to get to, if I want to go to Atlanta next year, that's going to be 3 flights and probably 30 to 35 hours total.
My God.
So I wanted to go back to that because earlier you said for you to get to a DrupalCon, it takes 25 hours. And I assumed that those were US and Europe-based DrupalCons, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So Singapore's easy.
I will say publicly on a podcast, you are a better flyer than me, because I literally flew from Rhode Island to California, which on the way out was like 6-ish hours. And I was like, plane landed. I was like, oh, thank God, get me off of this airplane. So,
I feel the same. Yeah.
So like 7 or 8 or 9 hours you're like, yeah, that's good. 25 hours, 30 hours. That's
it's all relative, right, John? Like everything's just
that's true.
A matter of perspective.
Sometimes it's worth it for Drupal, I suppose.
And maybe it's worth it for
things
us
we
to fly
suffer.
to Singapore, for
Yeah.
people that are in the North American area.
I will say my brother-in-law just came back from Singapore. He said it was wonderful. So
I was going to say, I've got a brother-in-law who lives in Singapore, and he described it to me in the best way I've ever heard, which is it's Asia for beginners. Like, it's safe, it's clean,
Love that.
everyone speaks English. There's, if you're going to Asia for the first time, there are few easier places than somewhere like Singapore.
I'm not going to lie. You probably just sold this to quite a few of our American listeners with that sales pitch.
Perfect. That's
So
what we're
Great
here
sales
for.
pitch.
That's exactly what I was going to ask. So, Surabhi, from your perspective, I'm curious, what can attendees expect when they get to DrupalCon Singapore?
Well, DrupalCon Singapore is going to be on the same lines as DrupalCons. It is going to be a similar format, and it is packed with all the nitty-gritties when we talk about DrupalCon in US and Europe. So it is going to be 2 days of conference with sessions and BOFs. Then we have trivia, we have trainings coming up. We have a contribution day dedicated to the contributors, dedicated to mentoring mentors. And we have agency leaders dinner, we have networking sessions. So it is all packed in the similar format as one can expect a DrupalCon to be.
Okay.
Is there anything special? I mean, I feel like you just you just described almost every DrupalCon I've been to. Is there anything that's uniquely Singapore that's a part of the plan? I don't want to set you up to fail though. So I also think just being in Singapore is quite special, and the people that you surround yourself with will be quite unique too. So in that in and of itself is really awesome. But I was curious if there was anything different or unique to Singapore.
There's one thing, well, there's a couple, but the one that I am most excited about is going to be the Splash Awards. So for folks who aren't familiar, this is especially big in Europe, there's a Splash Awards, which is a Drupal website award show. And it kind of originated in, I think it was in the Netherlands, but they do it in the Netherlands, Germany, France. There was one in the US, and there was one at DrupalCon Amsterdam in 2019. So for the last couple of years at Drupal South, we've run a Splash Awards. There's, people who build Drupal websites and people who have Drupal websites enter their sites in an array of categories: design, UX, publishing, education, not-for-profit, government, and then they get assessed by an independent panel of judges. And at the end of the first day of DrupalCon Singapore, we will have an award show with certificates and trophies, and people will come up and receive their awards. It's a really great way for companies that build Drupal websites to promote what they're doing and to get exposure there. And it will be open to, again, anyone from Asia and Asia Pacific. So I'm really excited about that. That's going to be at the end of day one. It will lead into the networking drinks. And I'm really excited about the sort of the first timer program that we're developing. Like when I've gone to DrupalCons in the past, my first DrupalCon was Portland in 2022. That was the first time I ever got to get to one. And I didn't really know anybody there. And the experience was like, okay, well, this is cool. But now, having gone to a few of them, knowing who's there, knowing how it works, knowing who to talk to, that opens up an entirely different experience. So with the first timers or the buddy program, we're really trying to shortcut that. So if it's your first DrupalCon, you don't have to learn what it feels like and come back later to really take advantage of it. It's, from day one, someone's going to show you the ropes, and it's going to be a much better experience.
Awesome.
I love that you're doing that, because you're going to have so many potentially first timers
Absolutely.
at this DrupalCon because it's so close to them. And I think that was actually one of the bigger problems that I didn't know was a problem in Drupal at the last DrupalCon that I was at. Dries had everybody stand up. And then the people that I forget how it actually went, whether it was like the people that were there at the very end. Yeah, he kept saying, if you've been here for 5 years, sit down. If you've been here for 10 years, sit down. Like, everybody standing was like, it was like more than half the room. They were all still standing.
Yeah. And we're seeing that. Like, most of the tickets that we've sold so far are from within the region, which is great, because that's the point of the event, is to connect the region. I was a little bit hesitant in the beginning that maybe it would end up being a very international crowd from Europe and the US, where it's a lot easier to get the money to get there. And it's where the sponsors, I think, were going to come from. But locally, it's been extremely positive.
That's interesting, because I was actually going to ask, like, what can people expect as far as the makeup of the audience, right? Is it going to be just a whole bunch of folks from Europe and the US, or are you going to see, like, I don't know. I admittedly don't know many Drupal Asia rock stars, but are there going to be a bunch of, other than Surabhi? But
I was going to say, Surabhi.
Right. So unfortunately for me, I guess I should get out of my bubble. She's the only one. But I'm assuming there are going to be other notable folks from the region there to give talks and whatnot.
So we have got a lot of session submissions throughout the world, but when we say Asia Pacific, I think we have got an overwhelming response this year. And just not session submissions, overall about DrupalCon, everyone is excited and everyone has been reaching out and very enthusiastic about just joining somehow, either the volunteering team or maybe getting session selected or just being there and do it and attend DrupalCon just because it is in Asia this year. And it is really overwhelming to see how everyone is so excited, because initially it was a little skeptical for us when we were talking about the planning, that will we have Asian audience at all coming because of the rates or because of the travels and everything. But I don't think that is the case anymore. The tables have already turned.
That's awesome.
Great news.
So, as anybody, again, that's listened to the show knows, I have a passion for attending after parties and social events at DrupalCon and then talking about them. So I'm wondering, will DrupalCon Asia, or DrupalCon Singapore, I should say, feature any cool after parties or social events?
There will be a trivia night. There will be and I'll shout out that we're keen for a sponsor for that. So if anybody's interested in sponsorship, then events at drupalasia.org is the place to go. There'll be a trivia night on the Sunday night before the conference. There'll be an agency leaders dinner, which, for those in the audience that it's relevant to, it's very similar to the CEO dinner that happens in Europe. There'll be a survey beforehand. And it's a really great networking opportunity if you're a Drupal service provider or an agency or a host, to connect with other people globally and within the region, and just to work out how to collaboratively compete and to promote Drupal and your own business in the region. On Sunday during the day, we're going to organize a Gardens by the Bay walk. Singapore, kind of one of the main areas of Singapore is Marina Bay, and most people know Marina Bay Sands, that really awesome looking 3-story building with kind of the surfboard on top. Right behind that is this great little, almost kind of rainforesty walk that is a wonderful way to spend an afternoon. Wear shorts, it's so hot, but we're going to organize that. So trivia night, Splash Awards, networking drinks, and the Gardens by the Bay walk. And of course, if anybody wants to come along and organize a different thing, especially if you're a Singaporean resident or someone who's been to Singapore before and you have areas that you're excited to share, like a hawker's market, that would be fantastic as well. So we'll get all of that on the website on events.drupal.org in the near future.
Very cool.
Wait, Mike, you said wear shorts and it'll be December. Is it not going to be cold there in December?
It's never cold in Singapore.
No.
Yeah. It's right on the equator. Yeah. So it's always going to be, I'm going to say warm because I don't want to scare people off. It's the tropics. So you're going to have to dress appropriately.
So there's really no reprieve for you, Mike, right? Because it'll be summertime in Australia, and then you'll just be going to Singapore, and it'll be hot there too.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
These are just the things we have to suffer through for Drupal.
I was reading up on Singapore, and according to Wikipedia, highly recommend reading this, by the way. Singapore is known for its multiracialism. even down to recognizing multiple types of races in its constitution. It's just fascinating where Singapore has been and how long it's been incorporated. What kind of diversity of country do we think we can expect at Singapore? I know we've been kind of talking about, that was one of the big questions you guys had too, was like, you know, who's going to show up, and we're looking at ticket sales, and you probably don't really know. But are we expecting a really diverse cast of people in that represent the region, and maybe other types of people too that are a little bit further out?
The short answer is yes. I think so far, as we mentioned before, we're seeing really good sales and interest from the region. But you know, when you organize events, there's the pre-schedule announcement and the post-schedule announcement, and there's a lot of people who will wait to see the schedule before they'll book any tickets. And so that's coming out probably around the time that this is going to go live next week. And we're really excited to see how that changes. But so far, all of the indications we've had, from volunteer submissions to session submissions to sponsors to ticket sales, have all been incredibly diverse. But with, I'd say, 60 to 70% of that interest coming from within Asia and Asia Pacific, which is exactly what we hoped for, which is fantastic.
Question on the session selection process, right? Are you, as an organizing committee, focusing on picking sessions that are solely from people based in the APAC region? Or, you know, if folks decided from the, you know, the North America or the Europe, well, you know, to submit, would those be considered as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have factors defined, and based on those factors, we tried to rate the different submissions that we got. And one of those factors was having been from Asia, but that is not the only thing. So we do have other factors like first timers, or the session topic, or the other factors as well. So it's not just that we are just admiring Asians here. It's like for everyone. And it is also like we want to give this platform not just to Asians, but also to people like from US and Europe, so that they come to Asia, and they also feel how it feels for us to come there and experience the travels and the difference with cultures and everything. So it is like an open platform for everyone to experience all these different things that they don't get to experience when they are going to US or Europe.
Yeah,
it's awesome.
It's a community event, and the session review process that we have, which I think has worked really well. There's track leads for one or two tracks, and they are responsible for the initial evaluation, and they do that blind, so they don't see the speaker's name, where they're from, their background. They just review the quality of the submission, and then they assign just a 5-star rating to it. Then there's a process where the content leads will get involved, and they will look at what the score was, what the topic is, and if it fits into the overall theme. So, for example, we want to make sure that Starshot gets a lot of traction, gets a lot of visibility. So there's some sessions in there about Starshot. They look at where people are coming from, whether or not they've spoken before, and the crafting that schedule is more of an art than a science of trying to make sure that it's a community event. It's a lot of work. But I think we've worked out something that really strikes that balance really well, of giving, there's really deep technical talks. There's really easy beginner talks. There's talks for devs. There's talks for marketers. There's talks for business leaders. There's talks for community members and for community leaders. So it strikes, I think, a really, really great balance. And I'm excited next week to have the schedule out there finally, so that people can start to see it.
Having worked at lots of agencies over the years myself, it sometimes is really hard to make the case for going to a conference until there's a schedule and you can say, hey, these are like the 5 things I'm going to learn. These are the different people I'm going to connect with. And that schedule seems to like unlock a bunch of people getting approval.
Interesting. So we're going to continue the show talking geography now with a little. I love these little types of facts, and it's mind blowing to me because this always happens to people that I hear visiting the U.S. Like you always hear about, a German family or somebody coming from the UK and saying, you know what, I'm going to land in Boston. I'm going to drive to Disneyland for a day and take a trip. And you're like, that's a 5-day drive. I don't think that's going to happen. And thanks to Josh doing a little bit of research, apparently the previous DrupalCon in Asia was in Mumbai. And if you decided to drive from there to the next DrupalCon Asia, which is in Singapore, apparently that drive takes 110 hours, which doesn't feel like a real number of hours that you can drive. Do you have any travel tips other than that you should fly? Do you have any travel tips for people that are considering going to Singapore to make their trip as smooth as possible?
I said before, it's Asia for beginners. It couldn't be easier. Like Changi Airport in Singapore is consistently rated as the best airport in the world, and it is.
Oh wow!
Yeah. So there's wherever you are, there's likely a flight to Singapore. If you're in a major city anywhere in the world, there'll be a flight to Singapore. It's super easy to get around, even though it's hot outside. Most of the place is shopping, and all of the shopping malls, they're huge, are connected with tunnels that are all really well air conditioned. So you can get from the airport to your hotel to your, wherever you want to eat, to the conference itself. The conference at the Park Royal Hotel in Marina Bay is directly above an MRT, a subway station. So it's super easy to get around. So there's no gotchas with travel to Singapore. It's just effortless. So, which is why we picked it for the first place.
This was new to me when talking to folks, but sometimes you have to apply for a visa to go to certain countries. Is that the case with Singapore?
Yes.
Yes.
Even in being in Asia, we have to apply for a visa to go to Singapore. So it is ideal for everyone out there who is planning to come to Singapore to take a look at what the visa requirements are from their country. And I don't think it is going to be a long process with Singapore. It is going to be an e-visa, which can come within a week or within some days. So it is pretty easy to do that process. And the government from Singapore is fully inclined when it comes to visa assigning. So I have not seen that anywhere else, but with Singapore, it is like the government officials are there to help you out with all the processes, and they are taking care of it, and not the other any offices which are assigned, which is the case in other countries. Like we have some global offices working, and then they are going to embassies, but here we can directly talk to the embassy.
Okay. And good to know. If you're coming from the EU or the US, Australia, Japan, there it is visa free. So for a lot of countries you can get in pretty easily. Sadly, from India you do need a visa, but they're not difficult to get. Yeah. But from most quote unquote Western countries, you can get straight in. There's a little 3 days before you arrive, you can fill out a little digital declaration thing on their app, and then you just walk straight through. And the Singapore airport, I think I've probably been through there a couple dozen times, and I've never had to wait for anything. You just straight out.
Nice. Just quick disclaimer: this isn't a legal podcast. Do your own research from your own country before you fly there. Make sure you take normal international travel precautions. But yeah, it sounds like for most people,
I'll remind you back to the question where I asked Mike if Australia was part of Asia. Do your research, people. Clearly, we don't know what, or some of us don't know what we're talking about. Mike, on the travel tips, tap to pay, credit cards, cash, like everything's accepted. All is good. Like no,
all is good.
All is good. All right.
Yeah.
Wow, it really is like an intro to Asia. I kind of want to go just to go now.
Well, I hope you will, John. I hope we'll see you there. I'm expecting to. On payments and payment infrastructure, one of the things that I love about traveling is foreign currency. Like I love getting some cash, and there's a part of me that is super disappointed that in a lot of places you don't need it anymore. So in my last trip to Singapore and the way back from DrupalCon Portland this year, I had a couple of $100 Singaporean dollars in my wallet, and I wanted to use them, and I just couldn't. Like they came back with me. So it's very easy.
Cool. The next DrupalCon, I'll be sure to bring you some US dollars.
You want to give me money? That's perfectly fine.
You can take those just $1 bills. Although, if you next time you come to the US, if you haven't, get a $2 bill there.
Well, I was gonna say, John, if you're gonna offer somebody currency, at least get $2 bills. They're super easy to get,
So
and nobody even knows that they're real.
I'll give you well, I don't know if this is a tip or I might get a nasty gram from Amy June, but I feel like Amy June typically carries a couple of $2 bills around with her. So next time you're at DrupalCon, if you're like, Amy June, I would really like to go back to Australia or India with a $2 bill, I'm sure she would happily oblige.
But bring something to exchange. Be
fair,
be nice.
Fair. Yeah, I just opened up the Amy June ATM right there. I apologize in advance. Okay, so you may or may not have an answer to this question, but do we anticipate Dries making an appearance at DrupalCon Singapore?
Surabhi?
Yes, absolutely. There is no DrupalCon without Dries, so we are going to have him there.
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
And it's a Dries note, so it's the whole shebang, the whole deal.
Very
okay.
cool.
This is maybe the worst pun I've ever made in my life. But is he going to sing the Dries note in Singapore?
I'm going to ask.
Let's request that through this podcast.
Wow. Now Dries will never come on the show again. Remember that
Perhaps.
time that Nick suggested I sing the Dries note?
I think there's an opportunity here for a karaoke night to be organized as a social event.
Oh, that'd be fun.
Yeah,
That'd
plenty
be
of
fun.
karaoke in Singapore.
And we should ship JD Flynn out to Singapore. He loves a good karaoke.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
Okay, so it has been 8 years again since the last DrupalCon Asia, and it sounds like there's actually a lot of energy around this and a lot of excitement. Do you anticipate there being another DrupalCon Asia in the future that's maybe sooner than 8 years? Do you plan on making this an annual or semi-annual event?
I'll talk to that really quickly because it's a very good question. And the short answer is this: we are working to make this an annual thing. We want there to be a DrupalCon that's accessible for everyone in the region on a yearly basis. And as we mentioned before, moving it around so that it's easier to get to depending on where you are. So we're already looking at where it's going to be for next year. Of course, we want to announce it at the closing ceremony or the closing remarks in Singapore. So we definitely want to do that. Again, this is a community event. It's not a privately backed thing. We're extremely grateful to the Linux Australia Council for basically bankrolling this event and giving us access to a lot of really fantastic infrastructure in terms of insurance and banking and everything else. It makes it so much easier for us. But future DrupalCons in Asia, will depend on the success of this DrupalCon. And we very much think this is going to be a success, and we very much think we're going to have another one next year and the year after. And we are, we've got that commitment from the Drupal Association. And if you are excited about this, come to the first one, help make it a huge success, so that there's just this momentum and impetus that we can keep pushing to keep it going.
How about you, Surabhi? What do you think? You pushing for an annual thing too?
Oh yeah, absolutely. As Mike said rightly, that depending on DrupalCon Singapore's success, we will be able to anticipate in a better way how the other DrupalCons can be planned in the coming years in Asia. But here's the queue for all the sponsors. We are looking for them, and please help us make DrupalCon Singapore a huge, huge success so that we can give you another year of DrupalCon in Asia, and then again for other coming years as well.
I have one more very important question, and I'm just kind of fascinated by event planning. So, and all the logistics it takes to make all of this happen. Can either of you talk about any of the challenges or successes with DrupalCon Singapore specifically, or in other words, will there be coffee?
There will be coffee. There's a coffee sponsor.
Always.
Yeah, there will absolutely be coffee. I mean, I've only been in events for 3 years for Drupal events. I come from a developer background. This is all pretty new territory for me. We're just really lucky. We've got an events organizer, Nicole Sterling, who does Drupal South. She's really helped pull this together. The Drupal Association, of course, it has its own events people. It's got its own team. They've been really, really supportive and helpful. So it's been a lot of work, and it will continue to be a lot of work, but there hasn't been any sort of, oh my God, what have we done? How are we going to fix this kind of moments? Like I'm not all gray yet. That may change as we get closer, but it's been a lot easier than I thought it would be, even though it is a lot of hard work.
Yeah. And to add to that, one hard thing that I foresee is that not having any data to back up and take decisions when it comes to anticipations on different things, like who's going to be there, who's not going to be there, like what can we expect when it comes to planning. So that has been a little challenging. But then, since we are talking about it so openly and we are getting responses in a very nice way, I think that is helping us a lot.
Before I ask this next question, just really quickly, can you tell me again when the planning started for this? You said it was around DrupalCon Lille, right?
Yeah.
When you started thinking about the event?
That was when it sort of took off, but I'd say the planning for it started in like May of 2023.
Okay. So since that time, Starshot has become a pretty big buzz in the Drupal community. Have you adjusted any tracks or any planning around talks or contribution around Starshot specifically? And if not, why not? Do you have plans to?
Surabhi, do you want to take that one?
Well, yeah. So Starshot has been the hot topic throughout in the couple of months since Portland, and we are going to cater that as well. We have some dedicated slots for Starshot, and it is going to be an exciting time for the Starshot team as well as the community, since it is in December, and that's when the Starshot is looking for like their high updates. And yeah, we are going to cater dedicated sessions for Starshot.
Yeah,
Awesome.
it's going to be a key part of the event. It's obviously, I don't want to preempt anything that Dries is going to do in the Dries note, but it's obviously going to be a part of that. And when we had the session submissions, we had a little tick box of my session relates to Starshot. And so we really wanted to make sure, without having like a dedicated Starshot track, we wanted to make sure that there is going to be representation in that program that covers what is probably the most important and biggest initiative that's happened in Drupal since Drupal 8.
I've been looking at tickets, and yeah, from Boston, it's like a 25-hour flight to Singapore.
20 hours longer than John's limit of 5 hours. So
Imagine if that flight was to go to DrupalCon North America, though. That would be pretty rough.
Yeah. Well, so I actually split it into 2 days. So if I fly from Boston to SFO, that's 6 hours, and then from SFO direct to Singapore is 17 hours. So
I immediately started building a website that could do that, and I don't want to build a website where you have to buy tickets. That's crazy. Sorry,
flights.google.com. There you go.
I have a recent philosophy of mine is enjoy the layover. So I hate the the rush, the 2 hours or 4 hours to go from one flight to the next flight. It takes longer, but I'm an advocate now for just saying, like, when you get to your first stopover, give it at least 12 hours, leave the airport, check into a hotel, have a sleep. It takes longer, but it's so much better in the end. So I would do that.
As somebody who is like, big guy, small airplane, I would tend to agree with that. It's probably good on those 25-hour plus flights to take a day or two.
And it's worth it, John. Like, it'll take you 25 hours to get there, but it's absolutely going to be worth it.
I know it's going to be a hard sell, but I'll see what I can do. Surabhi, before we let you go, remind us one more time, when is DrupalCon Singapore?
DrupalCon Singapore is happening from 9 to 11 December in Singapore, and the tickets are already available. The early bird rates are there, currently there for the first 50 tickets. So go out and take your early bird before it goes out. We are also looking for sponsorships to make this event a huge, huge success. So we would like to have your help there. So please come contribute in the way you can and help us make this event a big, better one.
So listeners, pause the podcast right now. You can come back to it when you're done. Go to the link in the show notes for the DrupalCon Singapore event and buy a ticket, sponsor if you're inclined, because it sounds like it's going to be amazing. Mike, Surabhi, thank you both for joining us and telling us about the amazing DrupalCon coming back to Asia.
It's been an absolute pleasure. And before we go, I just want to say, first of all, thanks for having us on. It's been really great. And I also want to take a quick moment to just say thank you to everyone who put in a session submission and who put in to volunteer. The response has been absolutely overwhelming. I think we had 5 sessions or 6 sessions for every 1 slot that we had available. The quality of the submissions was outstanding. So it's been a huge amount of work. And I know when the announcement comes out, there's going to be some people who are delighted, and there's going to be some people who are disappointed. And I just want to say thank you so much for everyone who put in a talk. And we hope we'll see you in Singapore. And if you didn't make the cut, I hope, please have another go next year, and have another go at other DrupalCons, because there's so much great content that we just couldn't find time for. And that's been the saddest thing for me in the past week. So thank you everyone who submitted and who volunteered.
You can always hit the hallway track, right? If your session didn't get, or a BOF, if your session didn't get accepted. So there are other options.
Do you have questions or feedback? You can reach out to Talking Drupal on Twitter with the handle Talking Drupal, or by email with show@talkingdrupal.com. You can connect with our hosts and other listeners on the Drupal Slack in the Talking Drupal channel.
You can promote your Drupal community event on Talking Drupal. Learn more at talkingdrupal.com/TD promo.
And that counts for you guys too. If you want to promote DrupalCon Singapore a few weeks out from the actual event, you can take advantage of that promo.
We will.
You can also get the Talking Drupal newsletter to learn more about our guest hosts, show news, upcoming shows, and much more. You can sign up for the newsletter at talkingdrupal.com/newsletter.
And thank you, patrons, for supporting Talking Drupal. Your support is greatly appreciated. You can learn more about becoming a patron at talkingdrupal.com and jamming that big Become a Patron button in the sidebar. Okay, we've gotten to that point in our show where our guests and hosts get to tell us where folks can get a hold of them, contact them, talk to them on the interwebs. Mike, if somebody wanted to get a hold of you, how could they best go about doing it?
I'm not on a lot of socials. I'm on LinkedIn, Mike Richardson, and I'm on the Drupal Slack as Richo, Richo.
Here you go. Surabhi, what about you?
So I'm quickest on Drupal Slack, but other than that, I am available on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. So I have the same name everywhere, Surabhi Gokte, Surabhi Gokte.
Fabulous. Josh?
Just looking for the mute button there. I'm Josh Miller on Drupal Slack and LinkedIn. I'm Mr. Josh Miller on Twitter. Huge shout out to all the amazing workers and volunteers that are making DrupalCon Singapore a reality. All of your work's amazing.
Very formal there on the Twitter, Mr. Josh Miller.
I think Josh Miller was already taken.
Yeah, you should have done J.O. Miller. Oh, come on.
I should have. What?
Come
What was I
on.
thinking?
Nick Laughlin, where can folks find you?
Find me pretty much everywhere at Nixvan, NICXVAN.
And I'm John Picozzi. You can find me on all the major social networks and Drupal.org at John Picozzi. And you can find out about EPAM at EPAM.com.
And if you've enjoyed listening, we've enjoyed talking. See you guys next week.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good one.